Native Americans built teepees in hours that withstood high winds and freezing nights. The design was fast, sturdy, and portable. So what exact method made it possible, and where did they get every material out on the open plains? It all started long before the first pole was raised. The right wood meant the difference between a teepee that lasted a season and one that failed in the first storm. So finding those perfect poles came first. Native American tribes sought out lodgepole pine trees growing straight and tall in the forests of the Great Plains and Rocky Mountains. These weren't ordinary sticks from your backyard. Finding straight trees in nature is trickier than getting teenagers to wake up before noon. Tribes had experienced scouts who could walk into a forest and spot the ideal tree from far away. These people had trained their eyes to recognize quality wood that would last through countless storms. Timing was everything when cutting these trees. Winter cutting was the secret weapon. During cold months, trees have much less sap running through them. Less sap means stronger wood that won't warp or rot as easily. Groups would trek through snow and freezing temperatures, searching for trees that met their demanding requirements. The pole had to be arrow straight. The thickness had to be just right. Not too thin or it would snap under pressure. Not too thick or it would be impossible to carry home. Cutting down a massive pine with stone tools required incredible strength and patience. Using a stone axe to fell a tree is about as efficient as using a spoon to dig a swimming pool. Stone axes and bone implements meant every swing had to count. Each cut needed to be precise and purposeful. Once the tree crashed to the ground, the bark removal process began. Using knives crafted from sharpened stone or bone, workers scraped and peeled until the wood was completely clean. Bark holds moisture that leads to rot. Rotting poles meant collapsed shelters at the worst possible moments. Each pole required hours of careful, methodical work. Missing even small sections could cause problems months later when the family depended on that pole for shelter. Some tribes were brilliant enough to prepare poles in advance. They'd cut, clean, and dry multiple poles during good weather, then store them for future use. Smart tribes treated pole storage like a lumber yard, except their inventory never went on clearance sales. Proper storage was an art form itself. Poles had to be kept completely off the ground to avoid moisture damage. They needed protection from rain and snow. Most importantly, they had to be stored flat and straight. The drying process could take many weeks. Fresh-cut wood needed time to lose its moisture content gradually. Too fast and the wood might crack. Too slow and it might start rotting. The right balance produced poles that were both lightweight and incredibly strong. Quality control was serious business. Each pole was inspected multiple times during preparation. Weak spots were identified and marked. When your family's safety depends on these poles holding up in a blizzard, there's no room for second-rate materials. The best poles were treasured possessions. Some families kept the same poles for years, moving them from location to location. These veteran poles had proven themselves through countless setups and takedowns. But having perfect poles was just the beginning. The real challenge lay ahead. Creating a teepee frame meant turning individual poles into a structure that could laugh at prairie winds strong enough to flatten entire buffalo herds. The frame wasn't just poles leaning against each other. It was precision engineering that had to work perfectly every time. The process began with selecting 3 poles for the foundational tripod. These couldn't be random choices. The straightest poles, the strongest ones, the poles that would support everything else. Choosing tripod poles was more critical than picking the right answer on a final exam. Get it wrong and everything falls apart. Prairie storms produced winds that could knock grown adults off their feet. The foundation had to be absolutely bulletproof. Transporting poles from cutting areas to campsites was its own major challenge. 20-foot wooden poles don't exactly fit in your back pocket. Moving giant poles through dense forest without GPS was like playing the world's most inconvenient game of pickup sticks. Some tribes carried them by hand with multiple people per pole. Others used pack animals when they were available. How do you move dozens of tree-length poles through thick forest without getting stuck every few yards? Tribes developed clever solutions. Poles were bundled together for easier handling. Specific people were assigned to watch specific bundles. Setting up the initial tripod required serious skill and experience. The 3 foundation poles had to be positioned at exactly the right angles. Too narrow and the finished teepee would be cramped inside. Too wide and the whole structure would be wobbly and unsafe. The poles weren't simply leaning against each other at the top either. They were bound together with rawhide strips or cordage made from plant fibers. This wasn't store-bought rope. This was binding material created from scratch using buffalo hide or plants like nettle and dogbane. Nettle and dogbane had to be gathered when their fibers were strongest. The outer layers were stripped away. Inner fibers were separated, cleaned, and twisted into usable cord. Making rope from scratch meant every family had someone who was basically a prehistoric fiber engineer. The binding technique was absolutely critical. Too loose and poles would shift dangerously in wind. Too tight and the rawhide might snap under stress. Knots had to be positioned perfectly to prevent slipping. After securing the tripod, remaining poles were added one by one around the circle. Each pole had its designated position. Each one required the correct angle and height. The spacing between poles determined how well the cover would fit and how stable the final structure would be. Each pole had to be exactly where it belonged, or the entire structure would be lopsided and weak. The completed frame had to be both incredibly strong and surprisingly flexible. Prairie winds don't blow steadily. They gust and swirl from multiple directions without warning. A rigid frame would snap like a dry twig. Experienced families could assemble their frame in less than an hour. The same structure that would stand solid through months of harsh weather could be erected quickly whenever they reached a new camping spot. Testing the frame was always the final step. Poles were checked for stability. Bindings were examined for tightness. The entire structure was given a thorough inspection to identify any potential problems before adding the cover. A solid frame was essential. But what good was a skeleton without skin? The tipi cover transformed ordinary buffalo hides into weatherproof housing material that could protect families through the harshest prairie storms. This wasn't a weekend craft project. This was survival-level leatherworking that required incredible skill and countless hours of labor. Buffalo hunting came first, naturally. These massive animals provided the raw material for everything from food to tools to shelter. Buffalo hunting was like playing tag with freight trains that had horns and attitudes. These hunts required entire communities working together. Timing had to be perfect. Strategy was essential. Courage was absolutely mandatory because buffalo don't go down easily. Once the hunt succeeded, the real work began immediately. Fresh buffalo hide was thick, heavy, covered in coarse hair, and loaded with fat and tissue. Turning it into usable leather required a process that would exhaust modern workers. Scraping came first. Women used tools made from sharpened stone to remove every trace of fat and flesh from the inside of the hide. Scraping buffalo hide with stone tools was the original full-body workout. No gym membership required. This wasn't gentle work. It demanded serious muscle and hours of repetitive scraping motions. Hair removal was equally demanding. Stone scrapers had to eliminate every single hair from the outside surface. Some tribes used special scraping boards made from logs with handles to make this exhausting work slightly more manageable. Soaking and stretching came next. Hides were placed in water, sometimes mixed with brain matter or other natural tanning materials. This softened the thick skin and began the chemical process that would transform raw hide into durable leather. The hide had to be pulled tight enough to remove all wrinkles, but not so tight that it would rip under pressure. Multiple hides were needed for each tipi cover. A typical family shelter required 10 to 12 buffalo hides, all processed to identical standards. Sewing together 12 buffalo hides was like tailoring a house-sized leather jacket with a bone needle. Bone needles made this sewing possible. Crafted from buffalo bones or deer antlers, these needles had to be sharp enough to pierce tough leather, but strong enough not to break under constant pressure. The sewing thread wasn't thread at all. It was sinew, dried tendons from hunted animals. This natural material was incredibly strong and actually got stronger when wet. Every stitch had to be perfect. The seams had to be completely waterproof while remaining flexible enough to handle the stress of repeated setup and takedown. Pattern cutting and sewing determined the final shape of the tipi. Different tribes had their preferred patterns. Some created covers that were more cone-shaped. Others favored designs that were wider at the base. Waterproofing was the ultimate test. The finished cover had to keep out every drop of rain, every flake of snow, every bit of moisture that nature could throw at it. Quality testing was taken seriously. Covers were inspected repeatedly for weak spots. Seams were checked and double-checked. Problem areas were reinforced before they could become failures. The best covers lasted for years, surviving countless moves and weather extremes. These represented hundreds of hours of skilled labor and were treated as valuable family possessions. A beautifully crafted cover meant nothing if it couldn't stay put when the wind started howling. Mounting a massive buffalo hide cover onto a teepee frame was like trying to dress a giant while standing on a ladder during a windstorm. Native American families had perfected this tricky process into a precise system that worked reliably even in challenging conditions. Specially prepared rawhide laces cut from the same buffalo hides used for the cover started the attachment process. These strips were processed to be incredibly strong, yet flexible enough to handle constant adjustment as weather conditions changed. The laces had to hold the entire cover securely against winds that could lift grown adults off their feet. Positioning the cover correctly was the first major challenge. Getting a 50-pound buffalo hide positioned just right took more teamwork than moving a couch up 3 flights of stairs. Multiple people had to work together to drape the enormous hide evenly around all the poles. One person trying to handle this alone was asking for disaster. Getting the positioning exactly right was critical for everything that followed. Too far in one direction, and part of the teepee would have dangerous gaps. Too far the other way, and the cover would bunch up and create weak points. The cover was attached using those carefully prepared rawhide strips in specific lacing patterns. This wasn't random tying like securing a tarp. The lacing pattern was designed to distribute stress evenly and allow for natural expansion and contraction. Securing the bottom edge required wooden pegs carved from local branches and twigs. These weren't fancy hardware store stakes, they were functional pieces whittled by hand to exactly the right size and shape. Carving wooden pegs by hand meant every family had someone skilled enough to make camping gear with just a knife. Each peg had to be shaped to drive cleanly into the ground while gripping the cover securely. Too pointed, and it would pull out easily. Stones provided additional anchoring around the base of the teepee. Not just any rocks would work. They had to be heavy enough to hold down the cover in strong winds, but not so heavy that they would damage the hide if blown around. Smoke flaps at the top of the teepee controlled ventilation and allowed smoke from the central fire to escape properly. These adjustable panels were operated using wooden control rods made from flexible local woods like ash or willow. Operating smoke flaps was like having the world's first manual air conditioning system. No electricity required, but plenty of skill needed. The flaps had to seal completely when closed, but open smoothly to manage ventilation. Wind direction and weather conditions demanded constant adjustment throughout the day. The entire attachment system had to handle dramatic weather changes that were common on the plains. A calm morning could turn into a howling gale by afternoon. Everything from laces to pegs to anchor stones had to be ready for whatever nature delivered. Quick adjustments were essential for survival. Experienced families could retighten laces, reposition stones, and adjust smoke flaps in response to changing conditions without major disassembly. Some tribes had special techniques for extreme conditions, extra lacing patterns for severe storms, modified anchoring for different soil types, advanced smoke flap settings for various types of precipitation. Weather-tight walls were only half the story. Inside these walls, families had to create a world. Transforming an empty tepee interior into a comfortable family home required turning bare dirt floor and open space into organized living quarters that could house multiple people through long, harsh seasons. Native American families had perfected interior arrangements that maximized comfort while maintaining practical functionality. The central fire pit was the heart of everything. This wasn't just a random spot to start a fire. The location was carefully calculated to provide even heat distribution while ensuring proper smoke flow through the top opening. Creating the perfect fire pit required more precision than installing a modern furnace. Except your safety manual was just generations of experience. Everything had to be exactly right because this fire would provide cooking heat, warmth, and light for the entire family's stay. Gathering suitable firewood was an ongoing challenge that required advanced planning. Dead wood from nearby forests burned best, but it had to be the right type and size. Different wood types served different purposes. Some species provided steady, long-lasting heat. Others burned hot and fast, ideal for cooking. Space around the fire pit was organized according to both practical needs and cultural traditions. The area opposite the entrance was typically reserved for family leaders or honored guests. Other zones were designated for sleeping, food preparation, and storage. Animal skins covered floors, provided seating, and served as bedding throughout the interior. These weren't random hides scattered around. Arranging animal skins throughout the teepee was like interior decorating with the ultimate multi-purpose furniture. Buffalo hides were thick and tough, perfect for high-traffic areas. Deer skins were softer and more comfortable. The positioning had to work for daily activities while being easily rearranged when family needs changed. Storage solutions were created from woven plant materials and additional animal hides. These containers held everything from food supplies to personal belongings to tools and weapons. Containers had to be waterproof, pest-resistant, and easily moved when necessary. Interior layout had to accommodate all the tools and implements needed for daily survival. Cooking equipment made from bone, wood, and stone needed convenient storage near the fire pit. Weapons and hunting gear required secure but accessible placement. Bone tools were crafted from skeletons of hunted animals, with different bones serving specific functions. Wooden utensils required understanding which local wood types worked best for different purposes. Stone implements filled roles that organic materials couldn't handle effectively. Weather protection was built into interior arrangements. During storms, the layout had to account for potential leaks or wind-driven moisture. Storage items needed protection from dampness. Organizing a tipi interior meant being ready for everything Mother Nature could throw at your house. Literally. Every item had to have a designated place that worked regardless of what was happening outside. Seasonal adjustments to interior setups were common and necessary. Winter arrangements emphasized heat retention and protection from cold winds. Summer layouts prioritized air circulation and cooling comfort. Flexibility to completely reconfigure interior space was essential for adapting to changing family needs, weather conditions, and seasonal activities. Creating the perfect home was only worthwhile if you could take it with you when adventure called. When buffalo herds moved or seasons changed, Native American families could transform their elaborate homes back into travel-ready bundles faster than most people today can fold a camping tent. This dismantling process preserved valuable materials while preparing for setup in completely new locations. Taking apart a teepee without damaging anything was like disassembling a house while racing against the clock. Every step had to be precise because replacement materials might not be available for months. Interior items came out first in a carefully planned order. All those animal skins, storage containers, tools, and personal belongings had to be gathered, sorted, and prepared for transport. Each item had its designated packing method and assigned place. Food supplies needed special attention during dismantling. Dried meat and preserved foods required protection from moisture and contamination during long journeys. Tools and weapons needed secure packing that protected them while keeping them accessible. Fire pit cleanup was essential before moving on. Fires had to be completely extinguished and ashes disposed of safely. Properly extinguishing a fire pit was the original leave no trace camping, except your survival depended on getting it right. Useful stones from the fire ring might be worth taking along, especially if the next location might lack suitable rocks. Removing the massive cover from the frame required teamwork and proper technique. The buffalo hide had to be unlaced and lifted off without tearing or overstretching. The folding pattern mattered because incorrect folding could create permanent creases or weak spots that would cause problems later. The cover was folded using specific techniques that minimized stress on the material while creating compact bundles for transport. Rawhide laces and attachment materials were carefully coiled and stored separately. Frame disassembly was the final step in breaking down the teepee structure. Poles had to be unlashed carefully to avoid damaging either the wood or the binding materials. Each pole was inspected for wear or damage that might affect future performance. Bundling 20-foot poles for transport was like packing the world's most awkward luggage set. The bundling method had to keep poles together while allowing flexibility during travel across uneven ground. Transport methods depended on available animals and travel distances. Horses could carry heavier loads over longer distances. Dogs were reliable but limited in capacity. Sometimes people had to carry materials themselves. Weight distribution across pack animals had to be calculated carefully. Loading sequences were strategically planned. Items needed during travel had to be packed accessibly without requiring complete unpacking. Some experienced families could complete the entire dismantling process in under 2 hours. This efficiency came from years of practice and clearly defined roles for each family member. Quality control during packing was absolutely essential. Damaged items discovered during dismantling needed immediate attention or replacement. Materials showing wear had to be evaluated for continued use or retirement. The portability of the entire tipi system depended on careful dismantling and intelligent packing. Families who could quickly transform their homes into travel bundles had the flexibility to follow food sources, avoid conflicts, and adapt to changing conditions. This remarkable cycle of setup, living, and breakdown could be repeated dozens of times annually, with each new location bringing fresh challenges and opportunities for the nomadic families who had mastered portable living. From perfect poles to weatherproof homes, Native American families turned raw materials into engineering marvels. Their ingenious methods created portable shelters that conquered the toughest prairie conditions with remarkable efficiency.